I want to join in the context here. Vince's comment on July 31st, the most recent WWE earnings call, which was on Q2, where he says, and we're not going to play the clip. I'm just going to read what he said. That where I think the context was he was being asked about AEW, and this is the time where he says that they're not competition in the way that WCW was. Of course, because Ted Turner was trying to get him, but he also mentioned sort of offhandedly, because I think the notion of Punk going to AEW was being brought up, and he says, "I'm not so sure what their investments are as far as their talent." He's referring to AEW as far as talent is concerned, but perhaps we can give them some more, which is a really, I feel sort of ridiculous that we're trying to unpack such a small sentence. This is not some grand statement or speech that he gave. This is just one sentence, and we're trying to read quite a bit into this, right? But on the other hand, we get so little in terms of what Vince really thinks. He speaks publicly so little, but is there insight we can get from this? And that what it's almost a doubling down. It along with some other moves that they've made recently, hints to me that it's a doubling down. All the talent that they're cutting even people like Braun Strowman and Bray Wyatt. I don't think Braun Strowman's going to AEW. I don't know if Bray Wyatt is or not. I'm thinking too about what Nick Khan said to Ariel Helwani about indie wrestlers, if you will. They're glad if people move on, that's fine by them, which is just great corporate speak to make it sound like they're doing somebody a favor by cutting them. But in some cases they are, right? As far as I think their careers go. Maybe Ruby Soho, now as she's known, was one of those who's basically said publicly that she's glad that she was cut. I think what we're seeing happen is this bifurcating. It's Chris Harrington word, bifurcating of two maybe wrestling audiences, definitely two different creative visions of what their product is. WWE not even willing to accept that they're in the wrestling business. AEW embracing that they're in the wrestling business. And I think we're seeing, certainly though, okay, yes, those visions are very different. They have different visions of what they do creatively. And they have different visions of what talent they value. They kind of already did in the first place. But I think we're seeing a doubling down on that in WWE's case. Maybe part of that is this sort of, you can't quit, you're fired kind of thing. Like, oh, all these indie people are going to leave us and Adam Cole's going to pass us up. And CM Punk was not interested in dealing with us. Apparently we had some discussions with him. He's not interested in dealing with us. And we couldn't get Bryan Danielson to stay. John Moxley wanted to leave a few years ago and he left. Wouldn't even look at his deal. Wouldn't even look at what the money was that we were offering him. And maybe it's just sort of
Christian. You got to add Christian too. Not wanting to really pursue a deal with them, And
maybe it's just sort of like, I'm starting to feel rejected. So rather than allow people to reject me, I'm going to preemptively reject them. And I think we're seeing maybe the next step is, we've got a Fightful reporting at least that deals are coming up around the end of the year for 3 other wrestlers, Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, and Johnny Gargano, who I would guess are not going to re-sign with this company when their deals are up. And these are 3 wrestlers who were big time indie wrestlers before they came to WWE. And you combine that with, well, then if not wrestlers, not people who have already been in the wrestling business and have already been on some level, relatively speaking, successful wrestlers, then what kind of talent are they going to sign? And maybe it's more of the Gable Steveson types. Not Gable Steveson, maybe on the high end. I don't know how often you can sign a gold medalist, but that seems to be their idea, right? And we see that, obviously we see that in the repackaging of NXT, this NXT 2.0. Something that's not focusing so much. Now they just put the title on Tommaso Ciampa, who's a big indie wrestler. But maybe that's part of a transition into a future of WWE talent development. That's more about people who have athletic backgrounds, perhaps. I mean, especially on the women's side, maybe they're fitness models, but not necessarily independent wrestlers. And I know Triple H at the Las Vegas trial, it said that it's not a negative if they have indie experience. I'm not so sure, and I'm sure Triple H feels that way. It's evident over the last several years through what NXT has put out that Paul Levesque has a different creative vision for what, even on the widest scale, not just like this NXT niche as if it's this niche that can't have a wide appeal. It appears to me that Paul Levesque has a very different vision than Vince McMahon about what pro wrestling can be creatively. And to Paul Levesque, I don't think it's a negative that you have independent wrestling experience. I think around 2014, he had a change of mind. At least he did relative to what he was willing to say publicly. I think what he's willing to say publicly as much as anybody is not necessarily what he believes genuinely. And I don't know what he believes genuinely. I hope he writes an honest autobiography someday, so maybe we can find out. But in the case of Vince McMahon, I'm not sure if... I know Vince is very much just not aware of what's going on in wrestling beyond his company. But I do wonder when or if he learns that somebody has an independent wrestling background or has any sort of wrestling background outside of the company, whether that becomes a negative to him. A not totally prohibitive negative, but a negative. There are other things that can outweigh that. But I just look at people like Toni Storm is now finally starting to get a shot on SmackDown, but she had sort of a start and stop after her debut. And she seems like the sort of star that they would want to push. But she has indie experience, and I wonder if that's a factor in why she was not pushed more consistently out the gate. Damian Priest, they're pushing pretty hard. He's got a background in Ring of Honor. Maybe he's an exception, but thank God he's tall. And I think they do, and this is one thing we can say in WWE's favor here, and I think they do value diversity of people from a variety of backgrounds. That's something that AEW needs to work on, and in terms of having stars who are not just white guys, as much as you got CM Punk, that's a big deal. You got Bryan Danielson and Adam Cole, and this is a huge deal for the company. But in the future, I think they really have to look at building people from more diverse backgrounds. I don't have like a ton of data to support this, but it is my intuition, my hypothesis that there's a wide variety of people from different racial and ethnic backgrounds who are more ready to embrace WWE, who are not as ready to embrace in the same proportionality that they're ready to embrace AEW, just because AEW doesn't have as much racial and cultural diversity as WWE does, especially throughout the card. But anyway, I guess what I'm getting to there is, Damian Priest, I think they're more willing to push him too, because now maybe he appeals to Hispanic Americans too, or Hispanics generally throughout the globe. But yeah, I think there is, my point finally though, I guess, is I think for Vince, it's along the lines of the things that we used to hear him say about people who have been in WCW, and Goldberg was one of those. And obviously he's still working with Goldberg now at however old he is, in his 50s. But there was a belief among hardcore wrestling fans, based on reporting, for whatever it's worth, that Vince was not as eager to embrace Goldberg, at least early on when he started working with him in 2003 or 4, because he was a creation of another company. He wasn't his creation, And I think there's sort of a parental kind of, well, you're not my kid, favoritism or lack of favoritism towards the people who he sees as his creations and the people who he sees as having gained some notoriety outside of his world and creative world. And that's totally unfair to the talent, and it's unfair to WWE as a business. But that's how it works in this company.